This slide goes over the differences between IDEA and Section 504. So students with disabilities can fall under one of these provisions or one of these laws. So Section 504 actually occurs in the Rehabilitation Act, and so it's separate from IDEA. Students can fall either into the IDEA section for disability coverage or protections, or they can fall under Section 504. But typically a student is not going to fall in both. They won't be both a Section 504 student and an IDEA student. They'll be one or the other. So this goes over a little bit about the differences between the two. So the one we'll start with is down here in this last part, that under IDEA, the schools can provide services for students ages 3 up to 21. So students as young as 3 who qualify for services under IDEA could be educated in the public school system. At 21, they're no longer covered under the public school system, and when they move into college, their identification doesn't necessarily follow with them. So in college, you have to self-identify and provide documentation. Now in Section 504, it follows you when you start school and follows you even after school because of the nature of these laws, which I'll go over next. So with IDEA, it's meant to protect students, yes, but also kids who are IDEA have a disability, but also demonstrate a unique educational need that's not met with just general education provisions. With Section 504 students, it's an anti-discrimination law, so it's just put in place for students to not be discriminated against because of their disability. But students who fall in this category don't demonstrate an educational need. So the big difference is IDEA students, it's based on educational rights, and Section 504 is about anti-discrimination. As such, then, students who are under IDEA, they get federal funding supplied to local education agencies, but local education agencies do not receive federal funding for kids who are Section 504. And this touches back to what I mentioned earlier. Students with disabilities who it doesn't affect their educational need or educational setting can be categorized as Section 504 so that they have protections of anti-discrimination. So a good example of this is, let's say, a student who has diabetes. Diabetes doesn't affect their ability to learn in the classroom or function in the classroom, but they could get protections under Section 504, such as I need to go check my blood sugar, or these kinds of things need to happen. Or students who have traumatic brain injury, maybe it's not affecting their educational setting, or maybe they have lost a limb. So students like this, they have a disability, they have record of a disability, but it doesn't affect educational need. Whereas IDEA, it does. It requires additional educational services. So to that end, IDEA has 13 very specifically defined categories that a student has to fall under, and there's parameters within each of those categories per state on how a student qualifies. Section 504 is not limited to specific areas because it could just be evidence of having any kind of disability. It could be physical, intellectual, emotional, but it doesn't have to fit in one of those categories. With IDEA, a student has to be evaluated in their full initial evaluation or any kind of reevaluations within 45 school days. So that means 9 weeks. School has about 9 weeks. With Section 504, there is no timeline for evaluation. Now, under Section 504, parents have limited rights. They're not required to sit in on art committees. They're not required to sign off on paperwork. So the parental rights and protections are not the same as the IDEA. Under the IDEA, parents have procedural safeguards. They're also a member of the art committee that makes decisions about admissions, review, and dismissal. And then lastly, what types of services they receive. Again, because the nature of does the disability present an educational need or not, students under IDEA get an individualized education program with specially designed instruction. That's IEP with an SDI. And then Section 504 students receive some services with some minimal accommodations, maybe, again, sitting close to the teacher or being able to go check blood sugar or sitting out maybe for certain activities in PE. But under IDEA, you're going to have a very specific program with pushed in or pulled out services of specially designed instruction. Now, some of the similarities are they're both federal laws. Students do have to be re-evaluated every 3 years. It's not the same as the art committee process, but re-evaluated every 3 years. And they do have to determine if there's any kind of disciplinary action, a manifestation determination to determine if the action was a result of the disability. And then finally, there are parental approvals for testing that are needed and for services to begin.